Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we will talk about how to call the different stored procedures that are there in the MySQL database by using the Spring Data JPA repositories. Okay, as we covered different ways of calling the MySQL functions in the last video, we are moving on to calling different stored procedures from Spring Data JPA repositories in today's video. Okay, these are the different procedures which we are going to call today from Spring Data JPA. Okay, this is just a stored procedure that takes nothing and provides what are the what is the count of the customers that are there in the customer table as an out parameter from this procedure. Okay, this is the same behavior we achieved by using the function as well, but as we wanted to show how to call the procedure from Spring Data JPA, we have created a similar procedure similar to that function, and we are going to call that now. Again, this procedure as well, this is just taking employee ID and it returns the email ID of that particular employee, the given employee ID as an input, right? The next one which we are going to talk, this one. Okay, what it is going to do, this procedure takes employee ID as an integer, as an input, and returns employee name and also salary and department name. Okay, we have written a query between a join query between the tables employee and department. Okay, and it gives the employee name, employee salary, and the department name as out parameters from this procedure. Finally, we will move on to calling this particular procedure. Okay, uh, this just does nothing other than just returning all the rows of the given employee ID, row of a given employee details. Okay, basically it returns the employee details for the given employee ID. Okay, so all these things we are going to call in today's video. So let's just start with the first procedure, get customer count proc. Okay, so let's go back to our project. Our project is MySQL functions, right? Okay, let me update this one only so that we don't have to build from scratch all the controllers, services, and entities. Okay, what we are going to call, we are going to call first the get customer count, right? So I'm going to the customer repository. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a method. Okay, fetch customer count procedure. This is a procedure call, right? So you can give it any name, but it has to it has to be annotated with an annotation that is called at procedure. Okay, at procedure is an annotation which we use to call the procedures. Similarly, to call functions, we have used that query, right? I mean, it's not only a function. If at all you want to execute a SQL statements, then also we can use that query. Okay, but here in this case, in today's video, we are going to use at procedure annotation. Okay, if you look at that at procedure, it is having couple of arguments. Okay, name, out parameter name, procedure name, ref cursor, value, everything. Okay, so if you don't specify anything, any attribute, right? So you can directly use the procedure name, whatever you mentioned here. Okay, get customer count prompt. But if you want to specify some, you can also specify a value attribute. If you specify this, the name of the, if you see this, the name of the procedure in the database. So whatever you can mention like this. Okay, value equal to whatever the procedure name you have in the database, right? Get customer count prompt. But also you can specify it here. Okay, so The moment we specify a procedure annotation, it returns an out parameter, right? What is that out parameter? It returns an integer, the customer count. So let's take that into an integer variable. That's all. We don't have to do nothing else. Okay, all this will be implemented, and this procedure call will be invoked by this implementation class. Okay, so that's all. Let's call this particular function of this repository from the customer service. Okay, here in customer service, let's add public. It has to return integer. Fetch customer count procedure. Okay, that's all. Here we have to call the customer repository, right? Customer repository dot fetch customer count procedure, and it has to return whatever is returned from the repository. And next we'll go to the controller part. Here we will create another handler mapping method, and it returns an integer. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take nothing, right? The input parameter is nothing. So I have to call the customer service dot, right. I have to annotate this with some request mapping, right? So let me call the request mapping, and here uh, customer count, otherwise just count. Okay, just count. Yeah, here I have to return the integer value. Now let me launch this application as Spring Boot, and let me go to my Postman. Okay, here if you look at this, what is that? Customer slash count. That's all right. Okay, there is a problem. We will see that. Ambiguous mapping cannot map customer controller method. Fetch customer count procedure. Okay, let me go here. Okay, let me look at the log again. Customer slash count, there is already a customer controller bean method. Customer controller dot get customer count. Okay, I think we have annotated, yeah, the same function under this one, right? Okay, function and procedure calls we have to do with same handler mapping method. So count proc I am using. Let's see it now. Okay, application is started. Let me execute this. See this, the number, the count, we got it right as 3. So this is the way we call a function, a stored procedure that is available in the MySQL database from the Spring Data JPA repositories. So let's move on to calling the other stored procedure as well. Okay, what is there? We have to go to customer repository, and in this repository we have to call this particular stored procedure. What is that? Get customer email. Okay. Now, get customer email takes a parameter, right? What is the get customer email proc? Okay, this is the procedure name. It takes integer employee ID or the customer ID as an input and gives the email ID as an output. So let me go to customer repository to public. What it returns an email ID, so that is a string, right? So fetch customer email and it takes employee customer ID as an input. Again, here we have to annotate this method with that procedure, right? Add procedure, and you can specify value equal to this, or you can directly specify without specifying value also. The name, whatever there in the database, this name will be referred to that particular store procedure name in the database. Okay, so here it is showing some problem. Yeah, the same method we are using, right? So let's suffix this with the procedure. That's all. Whatever parameter you pass here, it will be appended to that particular procedure parameter. Okay, we will see that. So let me go here to my customer service again, public string fetch, and it takes integer employee customer ID and return customer repository dot, it takes an ID. Okay, and let me go to customer controller as well. Here let's modify public string return customer service dot, sorry, this is not required, right? Here we have to pass the employee ID, customer ID, whatever we are getting from the path param or the request param, right? So let me annotate this with the request mapping and customer email, or email proc procedure. I'll mention email procedure and I'll give the email ID as an employee ID as an path parameter. Okay, at the date path variable integer ID. Okay, now let me restart this application and we will see whether we will be able to invoke this particular procedure which is having an in parameter employee ID as in customer ID as an in parameter, and whether it is returning the customer email as an out parameter. Okay, now let me go back here. What is that we have to specify? Earlier in the earlier example we have to specify like this, right? Count proc we have to specify. Sorry about that. Then only it gives the count that is returned from the store procedure. Okay. Now let's execute this one. Okay. What is that endpoint name? Email procedure. Okay. Email procedure slash one. See, uh, it is giving the email ID of the given employee ID or the customer ID, right? If you look at this, it is giving the different emails of the customers for the given customer ID. So what it is doing here internally, so if you go to customer repository here, whatever argument you specify here, right, it will be given to this procedure when it is going to be executed. So Till now we talked about a procedure which is returning some value but does not accepting anything, and also accepting one parameter as an input and returning one parameter as an output. Okay, but in general stored procedures will return more than one parameter also, right? Stored functions may not return more than one value, but stored procedures will return more than one value, right? So in that case, how to call all the stored procedure which is accepting an input parameter and returning more than one output parameter, that we will see with this example. Okay, what is that example? Let me go here. Yeah, see this. This is the stored procedure. It accepting only the employee ID as an input, but it returns employee name, salary, and the department name as three out parameters. Okay, let's see that how to call it from the repository. So as that is an employee stored procedure, right? I'm going to write that logic in my employee repository. Okay, in employee repository, what we have to do, we have to write a method public fetch customer, it's employee, right? Employee uh, fetch employee salary, all these things we are going to get it, right? Fetch employee salary, department, and it is a procedure. Okay, so what it is going to take, it is going to take uh, employee ID as an input. Okay, that's all. Okay, and it returns a couple of values, right? The out parameters, salary, uh, employee name, employee salary, and the department name. So we have to take that in an entity that can accept multiple values. So whenever we are returning multiple out parameters from a stored procedure, right? If we are accepting into an entity that can store multiple key value pairs, then the out parameter name and its value will also be stored into that entity. Okay. Suppose if we are returning employee name, the out emp name will be the key, and its corresponding employee name will be the value of that will be stored into that entity. So what is that entity we have in collection? That is the map entity, which can accept the key value pairs, right? So map out parameter name is the key, and whatever is the value, we are going to store that as an object for that particular key. Okay, once we are accepting the return data, then we have to annotate this with that procedure annotation. Okay, so here if you look at that, what we have to do, we have to specify the procedure name, right? So that's all. Now let's call this particular procedure from service public map of string object, and it accepts integer id. Okay, return employee service dot, okay, okay, sorry, employee repository dot fetch by id. Okay, that's all. Okay, let me go to controller as well. There is a problem. Let me import map. Let me go to controller. Here public, it is going to return string map of string comma object, right? And this, it is going to accept employee id, return employee service dot whatever return from the service, and we have to annotate this with that request mapping. Here employee salary, right? EMP salary, DEPT, that is my handler mapping URL. Okay. Now let's run this program and see whether it runs properly or not. So Tomcat is started. Now let me go back and see whether to execute this endpoint employee, right? Yeah. Okay. There is a problem, right? What is that problem? We will see it here. Type cannot be null. Okay. See, whenever we see this kind of error while invoking a program, while invoking a stored procedure, right? Invalid data exception, nested exception, illegal argument exception with root cause, type cannot be null. So, while we invoke a stored procedure, we have to specify the types of the parameters, what we are going to get and what we are going to send, all those things we have to specify, right? So in order to specify that, we have to use another annotation on an entity on which this repository is built. Okay, what is that repository? Employee repository is built on an entity employee, right? So we have to use some annotation and we have to map what are procedures we are going to call and what are the different types of data we are going to pass as an input and what are the different types of outputs we are going to call, we are going to get from that stored procedure call. All that kind of mapping we have to do on an entity on which this particular repository is built. So for that we have to go to employee entity. Okay. So in the employee entity, we have to use an annotation. Okay, at named stored procedure query. Okay, let's use this. So what it is going to do, it is going to map some, we can give some name to your stored procedure, and also it is going to map the types of the input and output arguments as well. Okay, so if you look at that, it is having a name. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give some name to this query. Okay, what is that query? Employee dot salary dpt, this is the name I'm giving. Okay, and after name we have to specify the procedure name in the database. What is that procedure name we are going to call? This is the procedure name, right? This is the procedure name, and after procedure name we have to specify the parameters. Okay, parameters, if you look at that, it's an array, right? So we have to specify the parameters. So there is an annotation at stored procedure parameter. Okay, here we have to specify different kinds of parameters that the procedure is accepting and it is returning. Okay, so first we have to specify the mode of the parameter. So what we are going to do, we are going to tell the in parameter mode dot in. What is the in parameter name? The parameter name is in underscore employee ID, right? And type is equal to integer dot class. That's all. We have to specify The same thing for all other output parameters as well. Let's specify that. Okay, we have three output parameters, right? Okay, first output parameter is out underscore. What is that? Out underscore emp name. That's a string class. Next one, out underscore salary. That is integer class. Next, out underscore dept name again. That's a string class. Okay, that's all. Okay, we specified the parameters and the types and the mappings, everything we specified, right? So this is how we are specifying the store procedure query name. So whatever name we mentioned here, we have to take that and we have to use it in the query, in the repository. Instead of that directly the store procedure name, we have to use the name attribute here, and what is the name that is specified as part of the store procedure, named store procedure query, we have to use it here. Okay, now let's run this application and see whether we will be able to run it or not. Okay, let me clear this console and see. See, again there is a problem, right? So let's check that what is that problem. See what it is saying, named parameter employee underscore ID is not registered with this procedure call. Okay, yeah, yeah, there is a problem it seems, because we are sending it as null, because we are not taking it as from the path variable, right? That's why it is not, it is saying you are sending me null, that cannot be bind to an integer while executing the procedure, right? Now let's run this program again and see. Okay, now let's check that. Again there is a problem, right? Let's check what is the error here. Named parameter in underscore employee ID is not registered with this procedure call. Okay, see what it is telling. Again it is telling about in underscore employee ID, right? If you look at that, employee ID is there, which is good. And if you go to employee repository, here we specified in underscore employee ID, right? Let's remove this in employee ID and see. See this, what I'm trying to show you here, whatever parameter you specify here, that should be same as what you specified in the named parameter query. Okay, while you call that procedure, you don't have to specify the same names whatever you have in your uh, procedure. Okay, if you look at that, if you look at this particular response, these are the responses, out variable names which we are getting from the procedure, or which we are storing as part of the named store procedure query. Right now I'm going to modify the variable name here and see whether it is still referring to that procedure variable name or the named store procedure query out parameter names. Okay, Let me clear this and let me go back and check. See this, whatever we specify in the out parameter name, that is coming as the variable name in the response, the key name in the response, right? It all matters is the types of data and the type modes of the parameters. Okay, while we specify the parameters in your method, in your procedure, and also in your name store procedure query. So that's all we, that is how we can get the different, I mean, more than one out parameter from a procedure. Okay, with that, let us move on to the final store procedure where we are getting the details, I mean, the whole row of a particular employee for the given employee ID. Okay, so let's check that how to implement this as well. Okay, so let me go to employee repository again. And here, what we are going to get, we are going to get fetch all employee details, right? Public, and and that will be of type employee, will return of type employee, fetch employee details, right? And it takes integer employee ID as an argument. Okay, and we have to call a procedure here again, right? Instead of using the procedure, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the at query annotation only. Okay, at query annotation. Here in at query, we have this get, what is that store procedure we have to mention? uh, Value attribute is there, right? Here, in order to call a store procedure, we generally use call, right? So while calling, we have to mention get employee details, and it takes an argument, right? That's all. Okay, let's see whether it works fine or not by calling it from the service. Public employee integer ID, return employee repository dot id. Okay, let me call it from the controller as well, and it returns the whole employee object. It takes the path variable employee id, employee service, at request mapping. What I'm going to do, emp details I'm going to get. Okay, let me run this project again and see emp details slash id, right? Employee slash emp details. Okay, there is a problem here while running the project itself. What it is telling, unexpected token call near line 1, call get employee details. Okay, could not create query for, there is a problem with the call, what we are making unexpected token. Okay, let's go to this one, employee repository. Instead of value, just yeah, there is one more thing, right? We have to specify, as we are calling it as using the call keyword. We have to specify it as native query because we are using it as with the query annotation, right? So let's check that now. Now we are getting 404 error. This is different. See, we got the data of the whole employee data, right? The whole employee data, the whatever there in the table for this particular employee, right? All those details we are getting. Not only the three attributes which we have executed in the earlier stored procedure, get employee salary, department number, where we are getting three out variables, right? Not only that, we are getting all data of that particular employee for the given employee ID present in that employee table. Employee ID, name, DPT ID, salary, status, performance, all those things we are getting it here. If you see this employee ID, name, DPT, status, performance. Okay, so that's all. Yeah, it is calling the get employee details store procedure as well by using the query annotation, and we are getting all the data into employee. Okay, so that's all about calling different kinds of stored procedures with that procedure annotation and also by using a query annotation. And we also have seen how to use at name parameter store procedure query annotation. If at all you are having multiple mappings like this, right, on this particular entity, there is another annotation name store procedure queries. Okay, that you have to wrap all these queries into that. Okay, name store procedure queries also will be there. See this, yeah. This is an array of name store procedure query annotations. Okay, so that's all about what we wanted to discuss today about calling MySQL store procedures. Thank you for watching. Please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.